All right, so this is going to be part 4 of our English colonialism lecture, and I hope we make it a long way today. We are still in the New England colonies. We have founded Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay so far. Today I want to talk about what happens when a Puritan becomes a rebel. And we're going to talk about 2 Puritan rebels. The first one is this guy, Roger Williams. I know you're looking at that picture going, Roger does not look like a guy. He does not in that picture, but that's Roger Williams. And the other is Anne Hutchinson. And when you see a picture of Anne, you'll see she doesn't look much like a girl either, so it all kind of works out. They balance each other, I guess. Roger Williams was a very popular minister in Massachusetts. He was a Puritan. People loved to come hear him. Extremely popular, had a big following, but he made a fatal mistake when it came to keeping people happy. And that's that he condemned Massachusetts Bay's charter for a couple of reasons. One, it didn't treat the American Indians fairly. And he believed that Indians were, in fact, people and not savages. And they should have all the rights of other people. For instance, he thought we should purchase land from them instead of just shoot them and take the land. That's going to make a lot of people mad. The second thing he does, and this is the big one, this is the one that gets him in trouble, is he is the first person to call for separation of church and state. Write that down somewhere because that's a big deal. Called for separation of church and state. It says up there that he denied the authority of civil government to regulate religious behavior. That's all that means. He thought that the civil government, that means the elected government of Massachusetts, should enforce civil laws, and the church should enforce church doctrine, and the two should never mix. So he's going to be very much against the theocracy that the Congregational Church had become. That's a fancy word. You might not know the word theocracy. Anytime you see T-H-E-E-A or T-H-E-O, theo or thea, it means God. And if you see Crossy, C-R-A-C-Y, it means a type of government. So a theocracy is a religious government of God, okay? And that's what Massachusetts was. Remember the examples I gave you the other day? That if you misbehaved, you were called out in front of the whole church, you were shunned, you were put in the stockade or the pillory. That was the church doing that. He says that shouldn't be the role of the church. It's going to be important to us because one of our founding principles when we decide to become a nation is going to be separation of church and state. This is the first guy to talk about it in America, okay? So kind of a big deal. In 1635, he was found guilty by the church of preaching new and dangerous opinions, and he was exiled from the colony. You'll see new is spelled funny up there. It's not because I had a stroke and I don't know how to spell new. I put it up there the way they spelled it in the my brain is not working today, guys. I apologize. The way it was in the court documents. So he's exiled. Now today, to be exiled, okay, whatever. If they exiled me from here, from my little town, I'd go to the next town over and everything would be fine. But if you're exiled from the Massachusetts Bay Colony, where do you go? Guess you could try and make your way down to Virginia. It's a long way. You're literally thrown out into the wilderness. And that's where he went. He went into the wilderness. And he ends up going to a place called Rhode Island. By the way, Rhode Island is not an island, but it appears to be one from the sea. That's where it got its name. And it's called Rhode Island because road means red and the ground's red and all this stuff. But when Roger Williams leaves, he is popular enough that a large part of his congregation leaves with him. And they end up going to this place, Rhode Island, where they, in fact, negotiated with the Indians to get permission to settle there. Now, some textbooks say they bought the land. Maybe they did. Other textbooks say they negotiated for the land. But regardless, they didn't just come in with guns and take it. and they made some kind of a deal with the local Indians and moved into this area. The original name of it was Providence Plantation. Today, Providence, Rhode Island is where it is, but Providence Plantation, just like Plymouth Plantation before. That was a kind of common name at this time. And it is a very liberal colony. Now, I'm always hesitant of using the term conservative and liberal with college classes, because in history, conservative and liberal don't mean the same thing that they mean in politics today. When you say liberal, you mean, in history, when you say something is very liberal, what you mean is it provides a great deal of liberty or freedom, okay? When you say something is very conservative, it means that it's resisting change. It's trying to keep things the way it is. So that's kind of the opposite of the way things are sometimes in politics. I had a professor tell me one time that no conservative ever conserved anything and no liberal ever liberated anything. I think that's probably true in modern society. But when we talk about liberal here, we're talking about a society with a great deal of freedom. They had universal male suffrage. That is a big deal. Universal male suffrage is a big, big deal. Now, that's going to be changed. Eventually, they're going to put property restrictions on it, but that's going to be at the demand of the crown. The people that settled there were willing to let all men vote. Now, I know some of you are going, what about the women? Well, that's going to be a long way away. But in a time period when most places only the nobles could vote or the landed gentry, these guys are saying, we don't care. All men can vote. That's a big deal. They also didn't like any kind of special privileges. One of the things that they tried to establish in Rhode Island was a classless society. They did not want to have upper class, middle class, and lower class. Basically, everybody was outcasts anyway. Rhode Island is still very proud of that heritage. The unofficial nickname of Rhode Island is, and I love this, the traditional home of the otherwise minded. Okay? So what that means is, that's the place where they'll argue with anybody in Rhode Island. I have some good friends from Rhode Island. They'll still argue with anybody. By the way, they're also the only state that voted to get this. They voted against the Declaration of Independence the first time, against the Constitution the first time. They were the last state to ratify. And they have voted against every war in American history. So they just tend to be the otherwise minded. But Rhode Island does kind of become a sewer, a dumping ground. Now, I'm not trying to be derogatory about the place. I'm using the terms they used back then. They called it a sewer because it's where Massachusetts dumped all the people they didn't want. Go to Rhode Island. Go out there and live with the savages. And, you know, it kind of worked. I'll give y'all just a second to finish writing and then we'll move on. While y'all are doing that, I had a couple of emails. I tried to respond to everybody. I think I did, but if I didn't, some people asked what the test was like. I'll tell you again, the test, you're going to get probably 30 terms off there, and you'll choose 25 of them to tell me about. You will have to write the definitions from memory, and you will have to write the answers to the essays from memory. It will look almost exactly like your study guide. I'm not going to add anything to it. Everything will come off that study guide word for word, okay? So some of you are not going to believe me, and you're not going to go study some weird stuff, but I'm telling you, if you just know the stuff on the study guide, you're going to get 100. And if everybody got 100, my life would be a whole lot easier. They're easier to grade. Y'all still writing? figured since we didn't have Gracie here translating everything into Latin, everything would be fine. You ever see my handwriting? It looks like I translated everything into Latin. All right. The next group person I want to talk to you about in the rebels is Anne Hutchinson. I love this lady. I always tell my students that, particularly my female students, that in the colonial period, it is very hard to find someone for women to look up to in this period because they were kept down so much. But to me, this is one of those women that should be a role model for our women. In a time period when women were told to sit down and shut up, she stood up and told them where they could stick it. Okay, and I kind of like that. I like somebody that's strong. She's outspoken. She's well-spoken. She's well-read. She's intelligent. She reads the Bible for herself in a time period when most people did not. In fact, the church at this time period often taught you not to read the Bible for yourself because it was too much for the common person to understand, that you needed it to be interpreted for you by your pastor. That your preacher needed to read it, and he had the background that he could explain what it meant. If you just read it yourself, you'd get confused. Well, she didn't buy that. She started reading the Bible for herself, and she started holding I guess we could call it Sunday schools. She started holding lessons, religious lessons in her home for the women of the church, where she taught them. And everything was great. As long as she's teaching women, it's fine. But she was so charismatic that some of the men started showing up to hear her preach or her teach on the Bible. And now we have a problem because the Congregational Church does not believe that women have a religious power to preach, ever. So now she's kind of upsetting the apple cart, okay? She's messing things up a little bit by taking on an authority that's traditionally male. She threatens the patriarchy. So what are you going to do? Well, people start asking her all kinds of things. And she answers the questions. And then one day in church, she has the gall to argue with the minister. She reads the Bible and she got something else out of it than the minister did and questioned it. So Anne Hutchinson is called before the church elders, before the church body, and asked where she got these wild ideas from. And she said, I got them from God. Now guys, you and I both know what that means. If you asked me where I got my crazy ideas from, and I said I got them from God, you'd go, he's been reading the Bible. But when she says, I got them from God, these guys go, this crazy woman thinks she talks to God. And they accuse her of something called antinomialism, which was a great, great sin in the church. Antinomialism is the belief that you get direct revelation from God, that you are a prophet. Okay? God speaks directly to you. It literally means against the law. Because she questions everything, and because she's willing to stand up for it, she is eventually forced out of the church. Now she says some things that are kind of scary. She takes the idea of predestination, Calvinism, to its extreme. She's an extreme Calvinist, to the point that she says living a holy life doesn't mean that you'll have salvation. Doesn't mean that you're going to go to heaven. The devil can quote scripture too. She says maybe you're living a holy, maybe you're doing everything right, but you're still not of the elect. Now imagine how hard that would be on people, because it starts making you question, am I saved? Am I going to heaven? well, I must be saved. I'm a good person. I did all this stuff I'm supposed to. And she says, so what? So what if you did everything? Because it's not up to you. You go to heaven if God calls you. If he didn't call you, you're not going. That would create doubt. And that's the biggest reason she was forced out of Massachusetts, is because she was making people doubt their own religion. And I think it came from a good place. I think she was legitimately trying to help people. But I understand why people got freaked out. So Anne Hutchinson leaves, and she goes to Rhode Island as well. Y'all still writing? I've already told this story to her, but it's up here now. So she ends up going all the way to Rhode Island. She's eventually even chased out of Rhode Island and goes to New York, where she and most of her family are killed in an Indian attack in what's today New York State. It was literally the wilderness when she went, but she's literally forced out of the church. Don't get all bent out of shape about the dates on this stuff. It's 1638, but I'll never ask you that date. It's not that important. What's important is big ideas. I want you to understand these and how they affect us more than be able to just recite one date after another to me. When you go off in the real world, I'd much rather you have an understanding of how we developed as a nation and be able to tell me that in 1638 Anne Hutchinson was kicked out of Rhode Island, or kicked out of Massachusetts, rather. Y'all are writing so frantically. That means quick if you're blonde. Or if you're just a little bit blonde. That just about got it?
Wait, you needed to click it one more time. Who's John Winthrop?
John Winthrop was the governor at the time. And John Winthrop, I'm sorry, I missed one. John Winthrop was the guy that he saw her getting pushed out and then being killed as punishment by God for her positions. Good point. Thank you. I've only been doing this for 20 years. You'd think I wouldn't have missed one, huh?
Well, I clicked on mine, I clicked again, I was like, wait.
Yeah, call me out. Y'all got it? Man.
Oh, I'm not writing that. I was just getting ahead so I can listen
Oh,
to you.
good, good.
How long did it take, like, everyone to realize that there's more land that way?
They knew there was more land, but they didn't know how much there was. It's going to be the 1800s before they realize how vast it is. In fact, we'll talk about it when we get there. But when Thomas Jefferson bought the Louisiana Purchase, all that area, and he sent Lewis and Clark out, one of the things they were told to look for was dinosaurs, because they found bones, and they assumed that if there were dinosaur bones, that maybe there were living dinosaurs out in the American West. That was in 1803. They'd only been extinct for thousands of years by then. All right, so I've got the map up here. You can see how New England is spreading out. While New England starts off as Massachusetts, it's going to become crowded. The good land's going to be used up, and they're going to start spreading out to other places. Until eventually, by 1650, These are our New England colonies. Massachusetts has that hook there. You've got Connecticut, you've got Rhode Island. All these colonies are out there. We've kind of already talked about this, but I want to make sure that we address it and get it written down. Let's talk about why we didn't have the issues with Indians that, say, the Spanish did. The Spanish are going to fight a much, much worse war with the Indians down in South America and Central America than we ever do. The Aztecs and Mayas and the Incas, those guys are going to fight brutally. The English are going to be able to wipe them out pretty quick. And part of the reason why is because New England, when the English showed up, the Indians were already pretty weak. An epidemic had already hit this area and wiped out about 75% of all the Indians before the first colony was ever established in New England. Now, how did that epidemic get there? How did they get this disease? Well, the thing that we never tell anybody, and the textbooks don't ever mention, is that when the colonists first showed up, that wasn't the first time they had come to Massachusetts. They had been fishing off of the Cape Cod for decades, and they'd been going ashore to get fresh water and food for decades before this. So they had met Indians and negotiated with them before. By the time they settled there, European diseases have already wiped out 75% of the Indians. So when they end up showing up, they're actually going to show up as friends with some of these Indians. A group called the Wampanoags, right there near Plymouth, are going to ally with them. They're going to befriend them very quickly for a couple of reasons. One, they're going to see the English as allies to protect them. They've been wiped out. There's not much left of them. They need the allies. And the other is the English had Squanto with them. Now, I know you've heard the name Squanto before. You've talked about it in Miss Thistlebottom's class once before. And again, Miss Thistlebottom is just my nickname for every social studies teacher you had in elementary school. But Squanto was a world traveler. He was an Indian who had been picked up by these English fishermen, and he had actually been to England and back several times on a ship. Well, when he showed back up, he discovers that he's the last living member of his tribe. The rest had died of disease. He's it. So he's a man without a nation. He ends up befriending the English and helping to negotiate deals with local Indians, the Wampanoags. He's going to help in 1621 convince Chief Massasoit to sign a treaty with the English. And again, Massasoit probably saw the English as allies, as friends with guns. And it's better to have them as friends than enemies. So in 1621, when they have their first Thanksgiving, what we don't ever tell you is what they were thankful for. Yes, they were thankful that they had survived that harsh winter. We always talk about that. Yes, they were thankful that the Indians had brought them food. We always talk about that. But what we don't talk about is they were thankful that an epidemic had come and cleared the land for them. They literally prayed, "Dear God, thank you for killing the Indians with this horrible disease." Okay? Don't do that at Thanksgiving. They will not approve. Everybody got this?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to skip that. Let's talk about when the peace does break out or break up. What we call King Philip's War. First off, there was nobody named King Philip, ever. At least not in the Americas. His name was Metacom, which sounds strangely like a transformer. But Metacom, that name somehow didn't stick with the English. And the English renamed him. They called him King Philip. So we're going to call this King Philip's War. That is a bust of Metacom there. he determines, this is the son of Massasoit, he determines that the only hope for the Indians to survive is to unite together all the tribes and resist the English. And he promises to push the English back into the sea. This is his big dream. And he's successful for a little while. He does unite the tribes. He does attack, and he wins a couple of battles. And then the English bring out their cannons and their guns and their blades, and the Indians just can't possibly compete. Even though they retreated to Boston briefly, I'm sorry, I thought there was one more there. They retreated to Boston briefly. When they come back, they are going to wipe out Metacom's men. They're going to capture Metacom and his family. And they are going to use the strategies that they learned in their wars against the Scottish and the Irish and the Welsh. Now, I don't know if y'all know much about world history, but the English were incredibly brutal as they conquered Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. And they're going to use the same strategies. In fact, for Metacom, they are going to draw and quarter him. I don't know if y'all know what drawing and quartering is. It's one of the most disturbing things you could possibly do. They literally tie ropes to both arms and both legs and attach those ropes to teams of horses.
Is that where they like stretch the limbs out?
Yep.
Yeah,
Attach it to 4 horses, and then they pull the horses in 4 different directions until the body is pulled into 4 pieces. Mm-hmm. Literally rip your body apart. So they drew and quartered him. Y'all still writing this? Mm-hmm. I want to go to the next one. I'm going to skip that picture. They cut off his head and put it at the city gate as a warning to other Indians. And they sold his wife and children off into slavery. This is how you defeat an insurgent army. And it worked. The other Indians said, we better not go fight them again. These guys are crazy, and they're bloodthirsty. They are never a serious threat in New England again. They went out west, they went out further, or they died, one of the two. There just wasn't an Indian threat at this point. All of those spots, by the way, were places where the battles happened. So you can see that it was a pretty brutal war. It was all over New England. The underlined stuff is the most important. What was that face for? Y'all got it? You good there, Stabby Dwarf? Okay. All right. Next group I want to talk about are the Restoration colonies. If you've not had a world history class in a while, or you had a lousy world history class, you might not know what the Restoration was. Don't raise your hand. I didn't teach you world history. All right, so if you know your world history, in England, Oliver Cromwell had overthrown the King of England. He had been accused of treason against his own people, violating the rights of Englishmen, and they put him on trial before the Parliament, and after they overthrew him, they cut his head off, literally chopped his head off. The short haircut at the neck, all right? Oliver Cromwell runs England for a while, and his son very briefly before he screws up. And then England went, you know, we kind of liked having a king. So they went and got the prince that was the son of the beheaded king, and they restored him to the throne. They put him back on the throne. But his power was very limited. This is called the Restoration. They're restoring the king. These are the colonies that come about after the Restoration. First big one is New York. If I can make it there. I'm sorry, I won't sing Sinatra to you. All right, so let's talk about how New York became a colony. New York actually started off as a colony called New Netherlands. Now, I know most of us had no idea there was ever a colony in America called New Netherlands. That there was a Dutch colony in America. I didn't know that until I was in college. You know, that's something we should have learned in 4th, 5th grade. I think I learned it when I was 22. So y'all are ahead of me for the most part. 1600 is when this happens. This is kind of the golden age of Dutch history. That's when the Dutch were a world power. They were battling it out with England to be the preeminent sea power in the world. They were a major commercial power. They had colonies all over the world, mostly in Asia, but they built a colony right here in the Americas. And it's really going to piss off the English, because it's right in the middle of their colonies. There's a Dutch one, and the English and the Dutch have fought 3 major wars. They don't get along. It's really a family rivalry. The kings of England and the kings of the Netherlands were related. And, you know, there's no fight like a family fight. I'm surprised I don't see anybody shaking their heads to that one. Y'all obviously don't live in my house, because there is no fight like a family fight. If there's an Albert's family reunion, there's an empty Kmart and 12-step program somewhere. All right. Y'all got it? Give you just a minute or two to get it done. And I'll sit here and nurse this coffee. My cup's about broken. Don't look at me in that tone of voice. Miss Van's over here staring daggers at me like she wants to kill me in my sleep or something. I don't know what I did to her, but she's plotting to take me out. Y'all got it? All right. So how do we end up getting these? How do we end up getting these? This claim? Well, this guy Henry Hudson is who gave a claim to this. Henry Hudson sails into. You don't have to write this one down. Henry Hudson sails into the bay that takes his name, Hudson Bay. He's the guy that discovers the Hudson River. If you know anything about New York, this is the area all the way around New York, okay? So, do write this one down. So this colony, New Netherlands, is going to be founded along the Hudson River, 1623, 1624. This really is an ideal place for a colony. It's established by the Dutch West India Company, which, by the way, has been called the most evil corporation in history before. The Dutch West India Company was a joint stock company that colonized and brutalized the world. The things they did, particularly in Africa and India, were terrible, terrible. Have you ever seen the movie Apocalypse Now? It's based at least partially on some things that the Dutch West India Company did. Their thought was that they would be able to make a quick profit on the fur trade in this area. And they really only cared about making money. As a result, they would allow anyone to move into New Netherlands. So you ended up with this Dutch colony that really had very few Dutch people living in it. It had French, a lot of English, African. It was a cosmopolitan colony with everyone in it. And they were all there to make money. They were not there as loyal citizens of the Netherlands. As long as they were making money, they didn't care, and they were making a lot of it this time period. Manhattan Island was the most important city in New Netherlands. It was called New Amsterdam. That's where New York City is today, by the way, on the island of Manhattan. They literally purchased this land from the Indians. And your textbook makes a big deal about this, and I always think it's funny. If you read a textbook explanation of this, they talk about how the Dutch came in, and it always says the same thing. With a trunk load of beads and trinkets, they purchased Manhattan Island. And it always makes the Indians look like they were idiots because they sold Manhattan Island to the Dutch for this trunk of glass beads. Doesn't tell you the whole story, though. Yes, it was a great land deal. Don't get me wrong. They bought 22,000 acres of the richest, most prime land in the United States today for a trunkload of glass. That's a great deal. Pennies on the acre. But here's the part they don't tell you. They bought it from the wrong Indians. They paid Indians from Delaware for it. So now who was the dummies? Your textbook talks about how the Indians were so stupid they sold this land for such a cheap price. But the Indians sold somebody else's land for a cheap price. To me, they're the smart ones. Let me put that in modern ideas. Miss Van, if you came up to me and told me that you really liked this young lady's car, and I told you I'll sell it to you for $15, you got a good deal, right? But who got the better deal? You paid $15 to get her car, but I got $15 for something I didn't own to begin with. I got the better deal, right? You're still out $15. I'm up 15. You know, whatever. And she got completely screwed, right? Well, the same thing happened here. The Indians were selling land they did not own. So why is it important to us? Well, it at least shows that the Dutch were trying to do the right thing. They were trying to purchase something, okay? That's a pretty big step forward. This is a map of New Amsterdam, so you can kind of see. I don't know how well y'all can see that, but there's a road that goes north to south there. Can y'all see that north to south road on that map? That road is called Wall Street. And it is literally where the wall was that kept the Indians out. And it is still there today. It's the financial capital of the world, right there in New York on Manhattan Island. That's where Wall Street is, okay? Can you see the long, skinny one, the kind of wide one that goes across the top, left to right? You will notice that is the broadest street up there. Guess what that is? That is Broadway. It is still there today, okay? So you can start seeing this is important areas here. This is going to be a kind of a strange colony. It's going to be established by aristocrats. If you don't know what that word means, it means the rich, the noble, the upper class. Also very similar to the name of a really good Disney movie from 1969, The Aristocats. If you haven't seen that, then you are a communist. My son watched it over and over again until I can sing every song from that. And that was 25 years ago. They established these patroonships. A patroonship was a feudal estate, and the idea was they would give you land and you would bring people over. They could live on your estate, and you would be like a nobleman over them. They would pay you taxes, but you had to bring 50 people to settle on them. It worked pretty well. It established a lot of people coming. It is, again, a very cosmopolitan. That is an SAT word. If you've not taken your SATs yet, you need to know the word cosmopolitan. That just means very diverse. A cosmopolitan area is free thinking and diverse. Lots of different people from lots of populations. Sounds wonderful. New York is still that way, by the way. But it also means there's very little loyalty. There will not be any loyalty, in fact, to the Dutch. I'll let you write a little bit more. And there goes the bell. Wouldn't it be better if we got rid of the bells and it's just like instead good loud 1980s rock music came over the thing?
That'd be great.
Glasses.
We need those bells like on Victorious.
Three.
Yeah,
That's what-
do or whatever, like that kind of bell, the cool bell.
So if you want to know where they are, New Netherlands is the blue area up there, where modern New York is, and Long Island down there. And the next one we're going to talk about is New Sweden, and that's that pink area down there, kind of south of Pennsylvania, okay? So let's talk about New Sweden a little bit. Another colony you've probably never heard of. In the mid-1600s, Sweden is in its golden age as well. They are kind of right at the tail end of it. And they decide that they're going to dip their toes in the colonial exploration world here in America and establish New Sweden. They're not going to fund it very well. It's not going to be super successful. And it's going to be way too close to New Netherlands. And the Dutch and the Swedes are traditional rivals. So what are you going to do? The Dutch had come under the control of Peter Stuyvesant. What a great name, Stuyvesant. That's him there on the right. Very attractive man. I can see you ladies looking at him. Yeah? No? Okay. Peter Stuyvesant decides that the Swedes are a threat to his colony. He's the Director General. And he leads an army in to invade this. Now, I don't like the term invade here because it brings this imagery up in our mind of, armies facing off on the battlefield and smoke filling the air as gunfire rains. That's not what happens. What happens here is he literally takes his army in, surrounds New Sweden, and without firing a single shot, the Swedes surrender to it. Not a shot was fired. It's what we call a bloodless siege. And New Sweden is absorbed into New Netherlands. Don't you wish all wars were like this, just bloodless sieges?
Not as interesting for now.
They are not as interesting, but as an old Marine, I'm telling you, they will keep you from having nightmares. So, got to get me an outfit like that one. I'm telling you. I think I'd look good in that great big collar.
I mean, you could wear it on Halloween.
I think you could wear it anywhere.
You might get some weird looks. People might think you're on drugs or something.
That's true. I'd probably get arrested. It wouldn't be good. Y'all just about got it? So what's going to happen to this New Netherlands? Charles II, the restored king, is going to decide that he wants New Netherlands for himself. He wants the Dutch out of his America. And he is so confident that he is going to do this that he gives New Netherlands to his brother, the Duke of York, before he has even conquered it. He's already said, "This is your land. Just go It's yours, go take it. So his brother, the Duke of York, who, by the way, will become King of England later on. He'll be James the First, I believe. No, James II. So in 1664, the Duke of York shows up with his army, his British Navy really, and this giant armada of ships pulls into the harbor around what's today New York. And again, the Dutch are so outgunned, outmanned, and outnumbered that a fight doesn't even happen. They want to have a fight, but it doesn't work out for them. The Dutch just didn't have enough ammunition to do this. And remember, it's a cosmopolitan place where people are not necessarily loyal to the Dutch. There were more Englishmen living in New Netherlands than there were Netherlanders or Dutch. So without firing a single shot, again, Peter Stuyvesant is forced to surrender. The British go out, they literally lower the Dutch flag, raise the Union Jack, and New Netherlands becomes New York without a single shot being fired. Super important because this is going to be their harbor between the New England colonies and the southern colonies. New York is going to be the important place, the most important city. Isn't it nice getting to listen to the music across the hall?
Oh, yeah, it's great. I love it. It's always Pearl.
If it was good music, I'd be into it.
Oh, you gotta click it one more time. Yeah.
It's way on down there.
Yeah, not that big of a deal.
I know he's listening to.
What?
Y'all just about got it? All right. Next colony is Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania. Anytime you see that word Sylvania at the end of something, it means woodland or wooded area. And Penn is going to be a guy's name. So this literally means like Penn's Woods or Penn's Woodland, okay? Pennsylvania. Let's talk about this group that's going to settle Pennsylvania, the Quakers. Quakers actually started off as a derogatory term. It was a group of people that were called the Society of Friends. They were a Christian religious group, but they're kind of a strange Christian religious group. They, first off, they didn't have a professional clergy at all. There was no priests. When you went to church, they called it meeting. When you went to meeting, they would just take turns from week to week leading the service. And everybody was expected to be able to do this. They also spoke a very formal English. They still do, these and thous. I had a friend of mine that was a Quaker, and he spoke that way sometimes. You know, put your name on thou paper, put thou name on thee paper, excuse me. They also were pacifists, and this is the one that got them in the most trouble. A pacifist is someone that refuses to fight ever. They take the Bible very literally. And when the Bible says turn the other cheek, they take that seriously. So a good Quaker, if you were to strike them, they wouldn't fight back. They would literally stand there and let you hit them again. Okay? Now, we have had a Quaker president. He was not a very good Quaker. It was Richard Nixon, and he bombed the crap out of Cambodia. But he was a Quaker, at least on paper. So Quakers were kind of a strange group. Nobody liked them much in England because they also couldn't swear oaths. This meant they couldn't swear an oath of allegiance even to the king. That's a big problem. That's a really big problem. If you can't even be loyal to the king, what are you going to do? And then you couldn't fight anyway. So they're unwilling to fight for the crown. They're so devoutly religious, they would refuse to pay taxes because part of those taxes went to the Church of England, and they couldn't bring themselves to support a foreign church. So they're kind of an odd group, and they need a safe place. And they're going to find that safe place in Pennsylvania. I'll give you just a minute to finish writing this down. Y'all got it? Just about. All right. So this guy, William Penn, is going to be the founder of Pennsylvania. He is part of a well-known British military family. His father was an admiral. He was an admiral. And he saw a great deal of violence. So when he returns back to England, ends his military career, he's looking for anything that will help him escape the violence that he committed as a sailor, as a professional military man. And he's attracted to Quakerism because of its pacifist tendencies. The king also owes his family a great deal of money. So as we saw with Lord Baltimore before, the king sees an easy way to get out of his debt as giving William Penn some land to pay back the debt that he owed William Penn's father, Admiral Penn the Senior. This also provides a way of getting the Quakers out of Pennsylvania. Out of England. So William Penn establishes this colony with paid agents whose purpose it is to recruit settlers in a very modern system. Okay, they put pamphlets out. They had meetings. They advertised. It's not unlike whenever your parents get those silly requests. You know, I'm sure all your parents have gotten them. that if you'll just show up and listen to this meeting, you can have a free weekend at our timeshare or something. Well, that's kind of what's going on here with this. They're advertising for people. His pamphlets were pretty honest. They told him that the land wouldn't be free, and that there was a danger to it. They were pretty honest. But they did paint a picture of a nation that you could go to, or a place where you could go to, where even if you have nothing, you could work hard enough and you could become a success. That's something that was not true in England. He also had a very liberal land policy, which meant, yes, he would sell it to you, but he'd sell a lot of land to you very cheap. And it didn't matter what social class you were from. He would finance it to you. Pretty smart. Everybody got it? Even you, Blondie?
Yeah.
Wow. This is a picture of Penn's land grant, so you can kind of get a feel for what it looked like. Y'all like my bullets on this, don't you? It's the Quaker Oats guy. I'm a genius. All right, so I don't think it is on y'all's screen, is it?
Yes, it is.
Is it? I know sometimes whenever I upload it, it changes it. All right, so let's talk about William Penn and Native Americans. The Quakers are going to have great relationships with the Indians. They're going to purchase land from them. They're also going to protect Indian rights. In Pennsylvania, Indians were free to use the court system. Okay? That's something that had never been done before. They were even free to testify. In Massachusetts, Indians could be brought up on charges, but they couldn't testify in court. So it was kind of a weird situation where you could be thrown in jail by court, but you couldn't defend yourself. Here, Indians have the full rights of the court system. The Quakers taught the Indians, or dealt with the Indians so well that they could walk freely among them unarmed without any fear. The problem is, eventually a lot of non-Quakers are going to move into Pennsylvania. And when the non-Quakers move in, they're going to treat the Indians the way all Englishmen do. And that's going to start to undermine all the good that William Penn had done. Got it? The government of Pennsylvania is going to be a lot different from other colonies. They're going to have a representative assembly that's elected by the landowners. So the royal governor is not going to be there. It's going to be entirely an elected assembly. That's eventually going to change. There was no tax-supported church. So even though it was established as a Quaker colony, even the Quakers didn't believe in having a tax-supported church. So other religions weren't taxed by a church they didn't support. That's a pretty big deal. Everyone was guaranteed freedom of worship, at least at first. That's eventually going to change. You're going to have to be a Christian eventually. They're eventually going to be forced to prevent Catholics and Jews and later atheists from holding office. But at first, it didn't matter. The last one is the big one for me. Talk about how much different Pennsylvania is from the rest of the English Empire. There were only 2 crimes in Pennsylvania that had the death penalty. You could be convicted and penalized for death for treason, which is speaking against the church, and for murder. That was the only, I'm not speaking against the nation, I'm sorry. That were the only 2 things that you could be killed for, was treason and murder. Compare that with England, where there were over 200 offenses that you could be put to death for. Okay? I would say Pennsylvania is a much better place. Much better place. It's going to be a very successful colony too. So successful, our first capital is going to be there. Some would say New York was the first capital. Historians argue about that. Anyone still writing? All right, last slide we're going to do today, Pennsylvania society. Again, it's going to be a cosmopolitan place. It's going to attract people from all over the world, many different ethnic groups, a lot of your religious misfits. A lot of the ones that didn't go to Rhode Island are going to go to Pennsylvania. There is no provision for military defense. What that means is you were not required to serve in the militia. There was no restriction on immigration, unlike Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay, where they only wanted Puritans. At first, there was no slavery. Now, eventually, slavery is going to seep into Pennsylvania, but it's never going to be big. Part of that's the fact that Quakers don't believe in slavery. Part of that is just that the soil is not good for plantations. And slavery is not profitable unless you can do large-scale plantations. They did have blue laws. A blue law is a sumptuary law or a religious law. Like, for instance, it was against the law to play dice, to show plays. There was just a bunch of things out there. I love the last one, excessive hilarity. If you were too funny, it was a crime. That'd be kind of rough. All right, so we're going to stop there for the day. We should be able to completely finish this Wednesday. You need to be spending some time on your study guide. Get it done. If you don't know an answer, email me, text me, whatever. I am glad to help you. Make sure you have the right answers to study. Again, the questions are going to be word for word off your study guide. The terms are word for word off your study guide. If you know that material, you should get 100. I want everybody to get an A on this test, okay? It is too easy not to. That's all I've got for you today. Make sure you go take that quiz on your blackboard as well. That has to be done this week, okay? See you guys later. If you have any questions, I'll hang around for a minute.